This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hi, I'm Melissa Ray, Chief Sustainability Officer at Sustain.Life, and I am joined today by Danny Smith, Senior Director of our Customer Success Team at Sustain.Life. Thanks so much for joining me today, Danny.
Absolutely, Alyssa, and thanks for having me on the Week in Sustainability. For those listening and watching that I haven't met, I lead our customer success team and support our clients in all aspects of their engagements with Sustain.Life. And it's such a treat and well-timed to be joining here today because I've been wanting to discuss the recent supply chain initiatives featured across media outlets. There's been so much news about supply chain engagement and decarbonization goals announced by several of the large companies over the last week. I've seen news specific to Amazon and SAP and a cohort of big pharma companies, including AstraZeneca, GSK, and others. What's your take on it all?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see this flurry of activity driving supply chain decarbonization ambitions. It's like everyone has been on the edge of their seat with the proposed SEC rule, waiting to finalize, which word on the street is we can expect it in October. And what's really interesting, and as a reminder, is that that rule did require companies to disclose material scope 3 emission categories. And that point was one of the most strongly contested points by all of the non-supporters of the proposed rule, which received over 14,000 comments. So this is like the most heavily commented proposed regulation that the SEC has put out in history. So, from my own personal climate geek opinion, it's pretty encouraging to see such a large swath of large, powerful companies with these complex supply chains leaning into scope 3 decarbonization in their supply chain, regardless of where that final mandate from the SEC falls.
Yeah, I think it's clear that large companies with established sustainability programs and goals want to really come out ahead of the mandate. Now, Amazon's 82-page sustainability report mainly focused on their own efforts through their own operations, purchasing renewable energy, electrifying fleets, optimizing data centers, all stuff they've talked about in the past. But what was different about this report and what really caught my eye was the inclusion of those supply chain ambitions. I saw starting in 2024, they were requiring all suppliers to share their carbon emissions and their reduction goals.
Yeah. And that's like a significant policy change with immense business impacts across their supply chain. Now, if I recall, I think Amazon has a goal to achieve net zero by 2040. And that's, of course, what leading climate science identifies as the reduction ambition that we need to maintain the 2-degree warming scenario and avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. That reduction requires deep and meaningful decarbonization across their supply chain. And we don't quite know the full requirement yet for Amazon. We don't know if they're, for instance, going to exclude small businesses from this requirement, or if they're going to place any kind of guardrails around the kind of reduction targets they want their suppliers to have. Like, for example, does it need to be a science-based target? But just within itself, the magnitude and the scale of updating their contract requirements with
Hmm.
all of their suppliers is a huge market force that these businesses are going to take action on because they're eager to keep their biggest customer happy.
Yeah, no, makes complete sense. And yeah, when I think about supply chain engagement from retail and e-commerce, I always think about Walmart's Project Gigaton and their efforts to engage their suppliers in its product supply chain with the goal of avoiding 1 billion metric tons of CO2 emissions by 2030. And that makes so much sense for retailers that have product-based supply chains. But in addition to the retailers and e-commerce players like Walmart and Amazon, it's exciting to see similar ambitions from companies across new sectors, like SAP as an example in software and technology.
Absolutely. We must be reading the same news stories because just a few days ago, SAP announced a multi-phased approach themselves for their own supply chain engagement program by 2024. And their program seems to focus on broader ESG criteria. They talked about engaging with their suppliers on diversity and human rights, environmental pollution, and of course, carbon emissions. And they're working across their key suppliers and incorporating not only environmental considerations, but also required documentation as part of their procurement process to, again, significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions along their value chain.
It's amazing. And I'll tell you, from my experience supporting our own customers at Sustain Life, this really is becoming the new norm. And large companies across industries are focusing their decarbonization efforts on Scope 3 through their supply chain. And suppliers know that in order to keep their largest and important customers happy, they're expected to not just calculate their carbon, but allocate it to specific goods and services purchased by those suppliers. So many of the customers on our platform today join for that exact purpose, to meet the customer data requests.
Yep. I mean, it's all about scope 3 emissions, and it's so much of what we've been talking about at Sustain.Life and how we engage with our customers all of the time. For anyone who doesn't know, scope 3, we're talking about category 1, your purchase goods and services, your supply chain. These are the vendors and suppliers you're engaging with to support your business. And scope 3 in general, this is a huge part of any company's carbon footprint. This is 80 to 90% of any company. And so I think we're just at this point where so many of these large companies have more mature or developed climate and carbon programs in place, and they've been focusing on their own operations, those scope 1 and 2 emissions, for so long. And now what we're seeing is this large scale shift towards the scope 3 supply chain emissions.
Yeah, I completely agree. In their announcements, both companies mentioned they're providing support and resources to suppliers. Anything more you heard on that end? And what does that actually look like?
Yeah, so Amazon is planning to leverage its scale and investment to help suppliers transition to renewable energy and increase access to sustainable materials. So those were two of the specific kind of topics or goals that they had. And then it looks like SAP is focusing on carbon reporting and transparency, with the plan to require their top 100 suppliers to do two things: to both report company-wide and product-level emissions for key products by 2027. So that allows SAP to report on actuals instead of estimates for their own scope 3. And I, of course, would be remiss if I didn't add that SAP is going to be running this whole supplier engagement program on their sustainability data exchange platform. And that connects directly to their various cloud platforms, including DWC, which, of course, Sustain.Life already integrates with.
I love it. Yeah. It's music to my ears. And frankly, it's what we're always talking about at Sustain.Life. I don't want to make this about us, but I think it's important. I mean, the ability for suppliers to calculate company-wide emissions and allocate that to the customers is what we're always talking about. It is such a central part of the supply chain engagement module, and something that companies really need to dial in on when they're evaluating carbon accounting software services. If the platform just relies on estimates, it might be able to give you a number, but it's not really going to meet the expectations of these kind of customer requests.
Precisely. This is actually something I talk about so often, but like seeing this with SAP and Amazon, what they're signaling here is a raising of the bar on carbon reporting. These big companies have been calculating their own investor grade carbon outputs for their own operations for years. And now they're looking to their suppliers, which again represent 90% or so of their footprint, and they're passing those expectations for quality and rigor down to them. And so this is a huge win, and I might add a market-driven one for integrity in carbon accounting.
Yeah. It's really inspiring to see such a concerted effort from major corporations and their supply chains, and I can't wait to see the needle really move forward for those businesses. Shameless plug for Sustain.Life. Let's do it. If you are a supplier in these value chains, seriously, come talk to us. This really is what we're built for.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Danny, so I'm just going to leave it there. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This was super fun. This is a really exciting topic for us. For all those on the line and on the screen, thank you so much for joining, and we will see you next week for another week in sustainability.
Sustain.Life is a sustainability management SaaS platform with deep carbon expertise that helps future-proof small and medium-sized enterprises by taking climate action. Go to Sustain.Life to learn more. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.